Welcome everyone again to the February edition of Indie AWS. Super excited to have Nathan with us and a couple of actually, I think we got one of our sponsors in the room as well. So we'll hear from them here momentarily. I want to say, make sure you are following us on the socials. We are at Indie AWS. If you are live tweeting tonight's event, which you can follow along with Indie AWS account, because Laura will also be live tweeting tonight's event. Make sure you use the hashtag IndieAWS. Make sure you get lots of exposure for the Twitter sphere. I do want to thank our sponsors. Without sponsorship, this would not be possible. So Indie AWS is brought to you by 6 Feet Up. 6 Feet Up is a Python and cloud expert consulting company that helps innovative tech leaders build apps faster, innovate with AI and ML, leverage big data. Hold on, I messed it up. Simplify big data and leverage cloud technology. Using modern technologies and processes, we make anything possible for our clients. My name is Calvin Hendricks Parker. I'm one of the co-founders of 6 Feet Up, and I'm also the founder of Indie AWS. If you have any questions whatsoever, don't hesitate to ask. I'll be here to help you out. I also want to thank our new this year, bronze sponsor from Reify Health. So who we have with us, sorry, I forgot your name already. I know it's in here.
Steve.
Yeah, my name's Steve, and I'm
Steve. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm used to Jeff hanging out with us here, so I apologize if I didn't readily call you out. But I would love if you want to say a couple things and about your sponsorship and support of our group. I would love that.
Yeah, Reify Health is doing a ton of work with AWS, and we are expanding globally. So we're always looking for great people to join us. And there's reifyhealth.com/careers, and we kind of span the gamut of use cases from Python to Java to ECS and Fargate, and all of that is in service of accelerating remote clinical trials. So as vaccine research is a really big topic right now, and along with many different treatments for illnesses, Reify Health is in the middle of that, making everything much faster and getting to market easier with larger and more diverse sample sizes. So if any of that sounds interesting, just definitely look us up. We'd love to talk.
Awesome. So speaking of, we have a. I'll get to that in a second, but we have a jobs channel that is in another Slack that I'll mention. I'd love for you guys to post there as well to make sure you guys get maximum exposure and the support for our sponsors. If you do want to sponsor Indie AWS, make sure you email Laura at 6feetup.com and she will get you hooked up. Laura's here in the video there. You can see her. She just waved. She helps me run all these things and keeps me on the straight and narrow. I'm thankful for her every day of the week. Speaking of the Slack, Indie AWS has a channel in the Indie Hackers Slack. So if you comprehended all that, go to that link and you can get an inviter for the Indie Hackers Slack, which Indie Hackers is an awesome group here in Indy. There are lots of different groups in there. Indie AWS has not a dedicated Slack, but like we're just a one channel inside of that Slack. Another big announcement, we have the Python Web Conference coming up, and there is a dedicated cloud track, which is why I bring it up to this group, because we're going to have over 90 awesome speakers this year. Last year, I think we were at 60 plus-ish kind of range. So we've grown again. We added an additional 2 days. We added an additional 2 tracks. So there's lots going on. That is next month in March 21st to 25th. It's kind of half day, so it's like 5 days of half day activity. There's all kinds of stuff going on social wise. So there's a cloud track, there's a data track, there's going to be 2 app dev tracks, and then we have got an amazing culture track. There's just some really, really cool speakers who have decided that this was worthy of them to join us. So I'm super excited about that. And then obviously don't miss the keynote speakers. There are some really just amazing folks who have joined us for this journey for the Python WebConf. I know it says Python WebConf, but you cloud folks, we've got a spot for you ready to go. So you can sign up today, go to pythonwebconf.com, and you can see the speakers schedule. Go look at the speaker list. I think you'll be impressed. It's really a diverse and broad group of people from just all over, geographically, background-wise. It's well worth checking out. So I hope to see you in March for Python Web Conference. We have moved to meetingplace.io. So if you're still on meetup.com, go and claim your meetup.com profile over on meetingplace.io with that URL right there. That'll get you all hooked up. and we appreciate you moving over to meetingplace.io. That all being said, I did want to mention one more thing with the Indie Hacker Slack. There is a jobs channel over there, which is what I was kind of alluding to earlier when Steve was mentioning Reify hiring. If you're looking for a job, looking for a career change, just go into that jobs channel on Indie Hacker Slack and kind of introduce yourself, say what you're looking for. If you are hiring, which we try to also cater to folks who are hiring, make sure you post all your job positions over there on Indie Hacker Slack. They also have a job board, and they will email those out at least once a month. They do a newsletter to get those things out there. So I love nothing more than to get our indie AWS folks hooked up with excellent opportunities. So take advantage of that. Now, I will stop talking because I want to listen to what all the cool kids are doing and about cloud migration. So I'm going to turn this over to Nathan, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks for letting me put a clickbaity headline there too. I'm like, I can't just go modernize it. I can't do anything basic. It's got to be extra, right? So I'm going to talk about why people modernize and migrate and go to the cloud, probably at a different, little bit higher than technical level tonight. But hit me with questions and stuff. I'm going to give stories about why people have done it, all that. It's not just because it's the cool thing, right? There's real reasons, real business reasons for doing it, and whatnot.
Yeah. So Nathan, if folks have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or feel free to turn your video on or unmute and interrupt away. I think that this is a nice small group, so it should be easy for folks to ask questions, and we want to make sure you get your questions answered.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. And I can talk, and then I cannot pay attention. So you might have to throw something through the air.
I'll pay attention. Like Laura and I are watching. Well, like Laura's watching Twitter. I'm watching Slack, the Zoom chat. I will butt in for sure on your behalf.
Right. Good deal. All right. And thank you too for hosting it. And Steve, thanks for hosting and supporting Indie AWS. AWS is just a fantastic platform to revolutionize businesses on. And it's not just because it's cool, and it is the bleeding edge platform. That's my opinion. 400 plus services, all sorts of things you can do with it. And not only that, but like the culture of AWS and how that pervades everything they do, that obsession with the customer and what the customer can do and what it enables with them, I think is really powerful. And that ethos, that kind of cultural reason for being motorizes a lot of that and kind of powers it. So I think that's powerful. I don't know how many times my role at Clean Slate is client innovation director. And so I do partnerships in client, in marketing and sales. And yeah, I actually have a computer science degree, and I'm in grad school for information stuff. And I have my pro essay, or not my pro essay, but my essay working on the pro. So I know the technology, but I love what it can do for people. And so that's why I'm really excited to talk about this. So thank you for our sponsors again, Steve and Laura and Calvin and all that. So, and I will reiterate too, like was mentioned previously, it's a great time to be looking for a gig if you're in IT, and especially if you have cloud skills. And so obviously that's what I look at a lot, but in terms of what we do. But man, it's a great time. If you're unhappy with having to come in the office, there's a lot of places that won't make you do that. And if you're frustrated with the kind of stuff you're getting to work with, man, it's a good time to be alive as an engineer and a consultant. So in what we do. So a little bit about me. So I mentioned some of it. Yeah, my background's computer science as an undergrad. And then right now I'm actually in graduate school. I'm doing a couple classes, should be out this year. And I'd love to learn. So that's kind of why I'm doing it. And, it enables a lot of things. I have a 20-year background in consulting, and then I've made some startups with some mobile platforms that were around and bleeding edge at the time, but now everybody does it. Had my own consulting firm for a while, did my own work, my own projects. And then I decided to join Clean Slate. So that's what I'm doing now. Who has hobbies? I have so many hobbies. I'm into amateur radio. Yesterday, I climbed a 100-foot fire tower and set up a radio station on top of it. I have a family, wife and 3 kids. They may bust here at any moment with cats, and it'll be embarrassing. Um, I have a Sasquatch in my backyard. I love turf management. I do golf. I'm not a big golfer, but I mean, I do play golf, but I love to go out and check out the turf. So I have a triplex reel mower and I like to work on it and fix it. It's a completely different part of my mind. So I love that. And then I also play trumpet. I actually went to college on a music scholarship and decided to do computer science for fun because I felt it could pay the bills better. So James Alexander's on it. He and I play in the Indianapolis Symphonic Band together. And we both serve on the board as well. So it's pretty cool having, exercising all those parts of your mind. Some of the best people I've worked with have had in computers have had that musical mind where it's abstract, but there's order. And so, because we build software and you're building things in the cloud, there's nothing to put your hands on unless you find the data center in the middle of the desert, right? It's all out there. It's infrastructure as code. Everything is code. And so, but it's very concrete. There's design and engineering, but it's also very artistic. There's no one single bullet that, shoots all the werewolves. So anyway, so I love that part of my mind, exercising it. Oh, I built a cabin. I had a real estate company and it's got timber rattlesnakes all over it. So believe it or not, there's pockets in Indiana that have a ton of timber rattlesnakes. So the name of my cabin, I call it Rattler Ridge. So anyway, so that's a little bit about me. I work with Clean Slate. We do cloud, basically DevOps, architecture, and app dev. So I won't go into too much on that, but that's basically what we do. And the reason I'm here is because we do a lot of migrations. And so people want to think of migrations as take all your data center stuff and move it over here. The Patrick Star meme, just put it over here. That's not what migration and modernization is. That is one form, but it's a very early form. And I'll talk about some of that. But there's a lot more to it. It's about doing things in the cloud with flexible and expandable and elastic infrastructure and all the services that are out there instead of trying to DIY everything. So there's benefits, right? I don't want to get too high level, but kind of we're in this age of unprecedented change. And sometimes for the businesses that we all serve, it's more about getting there first and being the fastest and being able to change and being able to take your solution and give it to everyone. That's a bigger motivation for business to invest. Think SaaS platforms that span the globe. Think use case scenarios where you need to support a certain geography, but you don't want to have a permanent presence there. Think things that might take you a lot longer to do individually than if you just use a service that already accelerates you 30, 40, 50% down the road. That's the kind of stuff that the cloud allows us. And to use I hate using cliches, but the digital transformation is kind of that. It's taking companies and just really accelerating. So like what Steve works with, maybe with lots of data. I don't know. I'm just guessing. Everybody in healthcare has so much data. I mean, 10 years ago, you were really hamstrung with what you could do because you couldn't pay to keep that much data. You didn't have that much processing power. Now with the cloud, you're really limited by your imagination, realistically. There's asterisk, star, footnote there, but you're really limited by what you can conceive of. IoT data streaming, what can you capture? What data can you capture about something? My kids did competitive jump rope for a while. Yeah, that's a thing. Competitive jump rope. And so I was working with, it was the Azure platform at the time, but I was working with a Microsoft engineer to stream telemetry data to capture all the routines so that we could capture all the data there and eliminate 4 or 5 judges at each station, almost eliminate them. You can't totally. That's that kind of innovation. And then not only that, but breaking down, those events. And you probably saw some of it at the Olympics this year. You notice the real-time scores on some of the events like the figure skating. They complete the trick and all this, the score goes up. All the technology that's behind that is amazing to me. So just being able to facilitate those kind of capabilities in the companies that we serve is huge. It's just, so resiliency, right? Most data centers, if you had like 3 or 4 people in your IT department and you want to have resiliency, it's extraordinarily difficult to manage a parallel data center if you live in, say, Indianapolis and you want a regional replication type architecture out in California, East and West, right? Common scenario. My gosh, if you don't have the cloud to do that, that's really difficult. So the resiliency that you can gain, not only from, the capabilities that backup and DR scenarios introduced, but also what you can do on your applications. So the adaptability. Here's a good use case. Why go to the cloud? So here's a company I worked with, and they said, well, here's a perfect use case of, for adaptability that we had. So they're a travel insurance provider. You can imagine what their life was like when the pandemic hit. And all of a sudden, travel was severely limited. And then there were brief times when they needed to spin up all that travel capability. All of a sudden, everybody wanted it when policies changed across the globe. So they support a lot of the United States. They had a lot of people flying to and from India in those brief windows of time, go home, see family, come back. Well, they were able to spin up marketing campaigns specifically in India just by standing up that infrastructure for a few weeks, getting all their ads out there, and then shutting it down. And it wasn't that expensive. Now, and can you imagine trying to do that 10, 15, 20 years ago without all the technologies we have to make that accessible, like regional data centers in the cloud, and then tools like CloudFront and things that cache data really close to proximity where people need that. It would have been so cost prohibitive, they never could have even done that kind of a marketing campaign. So the kind of adaptability, not only from geographical presence, but also things like scale. That's probably the easiest one. Like we were talking at the beginning of this call, I did a lot of e-commerce apps as a programmer earlier in my career. And my gosh, we always way over architected everything because the hardware wasn't that expensive, and it wasn't expensive to keep it running, but you couldn't ever really expand out without purchasing equipment. You buy a piece of equipment, they'd ship it to the data center. There was a whole it would take weeks at best to add a new server to the rack. Today, mouse click, or you don't even have to mouse click. You have an auto scaling group that just blows it out for you and then contracts when you're done. So those kind of capabilities seem, if you've been in the cloud for years, which I'm sure several of you have and many of you have, it's like we just take it for granted, but that stuff is so amazingly powerful to people that that's why it's taken off. So, and then just imagine what you can do with innovation then when you're not spending all your time doing that kind of thing, right? You're building the next solution. And we've kind of talked about DevOps, and we'll hit that some too, but just think of the way and how quickly we can release software now versus what we could before. So for those who have a longer tenure in the industry, it's like, man, the rate of change is accelerated so much. So kind of the big picture is all these little short-term agility exercises and releases that we can do, all the agility that is enabled by the cloud, migrating your application to the cloud, modernizing it so that you can take advantage of everything. And then also the long-term marathon that you engage in. So you're not only being able to release quicker, but you're also able to hit your long-term goals. So it's kind of that very agile sprint. It's kind of all come together with modern technology in that regard. So I get excited about it. Any questions so far?
I've been seeing you in the chat. I'll have questions for you later, I'm sure.
Okay. I'm going to keep going.
You should.
All right. So why migrate? I'll try to give real world examples. I like the top left one the best, this agility and staff productivity one the best. I like this one a lot. Like I said, we used to have to architect systems and try to project. We would do all sorts of Google reports and web trends. We'd look at web traffic and we'd try to and we'd play with the voodoo doll, and we'd, try to read the black box about what was going to happen in the future or what could happen and plan our infrastructure that way. Now we don't do that. Everything is code. Everything's code, even the infrastructure, even the cloud architecture. So that agility lets us auto scale, gives us that elasticity. We go up and down, and we don't really worry about those scenarios as much, as long as we set things up right, of course. Staff productivity is one I always love to look at. Just think of how much more you could get done if you were focused on creating and innovating the next product instead of managing what you already have or trying to expand and make more efficient what you've already built in the past. That's a powerful thing, to realign your staff, not just with maintenance, but with the future of your business and what you're doing. So that's a powerful thing to people. Example, staff productivity, the most basic thing. Okay, let's say I don't want to run my infrastructure on premise in the data center closet. I want to run it in the cloud. I've got a small shop. This is a common scenario I run into when I talk to people about what they're trying to do. They're like, man, we're tired of servers going down for weird reasons. I'll give a couple examples. One time, a customer came and said, yeah, one day our whole data center just shut down. I was like, why? They're like, well, a mouse had defecated on a circuit board over a period of time, and eventually it shorted out the circuit board and took the whole data center down. The whole thing. And of course, it took them a long time. It took them a while to figure out where that happened and how to fix that. They're like, here I am. I'm an engineer, and I'm having to figure out how to keep mice out of the room. And then the risk, of course, that provides to your business. In their case, they're manufacturing, so it shuts down their operations for a day or two in terms of being able to ship products out, because all their IT systems do the shipping. So little things like that. Another scenario, same company, they have one source of power that comes into their data center, and it's along a busy street. Well, what happens if a car gets in an accident, hits that telephone pole, takes down their power? They're down for a day. They have no other way to even get power into the building. So moving to the cloud the main thing it does for them is, yeah, there's some resiliency there, right? Because the data centers that AWS and major cloud providers give you usually far exceed your typical corporate data center. So much so that like DOD and the federal government use them in scenarios. So I don't think too many people have like guys with M16s guarding their data centers like some of the cloud data centers do. So they're just managed to a whole different level. Most people can't meet that. Well, the power backups and all that's far more resilient, but also those people who are losing sleep at night or having to address these weird scenarios like mouse took out my data center, they sleep better at night. Now they don't even worry about that because they've got redundancy in the cloud. Now they could go focus on serving their customers. So for even like a small IT shop, that's a game changer for them. Even if they don't really modernize their systems, they just move it in the cloud. So that's one big motivator, I think, is that staff productivity. Now they're focused on innovation. They're focused on creativity. I'll say improve security and operational resilience kind of got thrown in that. It's really hard to come close to what major cloud providers do in terms of operational resilience on their platforms and security. And especially when you get into, well-architected solutions. Cost reduction, I'll talk about cost reduction. If you're doing apples to apples comparison, I think cost reduction is a good business driver for going to the cloud. Here's my real world input though, is a lot of times people don't do apples to apples. They don't just do lift and shift. They're not running 50 VMs here and they literally port 50 VMs out into US East 1. They just don't do that. Usually what they do is they move it over. In the process, they discover how they can right size it. So they change it. So that might save them some money. but then they do a bunch more just because they can. And so usually what we see, this is Nathan speaking from my anecdotal experience, is customers actually end up doing more. So they end up spending more because it's not apples to apples. Now they're like, man, we can do so much more faster that we're going to. So like one customer, they had a big SaaS application and we refactored it, rewrote it, re-architected it because it was taking them months to roll on a new customer. So imagine if it took months to sign up for a new Salesforce account, right? You probably wouldn't grow very fast as Salesforce. Well, we went in, rewrote their app so that they can almost, as fast as they can sign people up, they can roll this out in a way that's manageable. So those kind of capabilities, if your business model is based on accelerating growth, yeah, it's worth the investment to refactor that app. So yeah, those folks spend more in the cloud, sure. But guess what? They're getting a whole much more on the revenue side because they could take on 100 more customers. So data center consolidation, we see some people do that. Usually in the old school ways, people have 2 data centers. And especially if you're a smaller group, you'd have one really good data center at your primary, and you might test that backup every once in a while. Lucky if it actually worked when you needed it. And it had to be almost a parallel setup. Well, now in the cloud, there's a lot of different DR scenarios. You can retain replication across those 2, but that can be expensive because you're paying for 2. Or depending on what your RTO is, you can go in and set up like a pilot light architecture where that future backup data center doesn't really need to be stood up instantaneously as if nothing happened. It can be a few hours. That way you don't have to pay to maintain this parallel data center. A lot of people do that. If their situation requires, there's no gold standard for everybody. So M&A, another reason for cloud. You don't have to worry about consolidating physical data centers. You just move it all into the cloud. So especially if everybody's already in the cloud, it can be pretty fast how well you can consolidate data centers and platforms. So, and IoT. So everybody dealing with IoT at all yet in their groups? So if you haven't yet, IoT, you're talking about lots of devices, capturing lots of information, storing lots of data. And that kind of unlimited flexible architecture really helps with IoT. That's a big driver for cloud. AWS, has a cloud management platform for IoT devices, and it makes device administration a whole lot easier. I've got a customer who has rolled their own device management, and it's a pain. It's a custom application. It's kind of this amalgamation of different platforms and practices. It was the best they could do at the time. But with the recent evolution of IoT devices and their capabilities on cloud platforms, they're like, okay, we need to scrap our custom app and go cloud native on one platform or the other. So managing thousands, millions of devices, think if you're like a manufacturing plant with devices everywhere, measuring everything, that could be really powerful. It's just really
that actually brings up my question, Nathan, which
Sure.
was for folks who, obviously you don't want to lift and shift. You want to go cloud native, but
Yep.
there's a sunk cost that you just mentioned that they built their own management, control plane for their IoT devices.
Mhm.
How are you convincing, management, whoever the one who's with with the wallet purse strings to do this, rewrite, ditch whatever they had already written? It seems like that's a critical piece to truly leveraging a cloud native operation, is to get them to get rid of that sunk cost fallacy and move forward in the future.
It's, what? I haven't seen it be cost driven. Usually it's, I'm so tired of dealing with this. It's such a pain in my ass that I don't want to deal with it anymore. And so the dollars almost becomes less of an issue than I'm not dealing with constant break fix. I can deploy my changes quicker. I haven't even really talked about DevOps and all this, but imagine being able to deploy a firmware update, a little bug fix out to your devices, millions of devices with Greengrass or whatever, really quickly versus I got to take, I got to keep up with what I can do that AWS has already built. So I think that's it. Operational efficiency, resiliency, and stability of the platform are big drivers for people going there. The cost, it's AWS, and this is why I get on they actually want you very much, I'm sure every cloud provider does, to migrate to their platform. The thing I throw at them is, hey, they will fund part of your project to move over here. They want your business, right? I mean, if you could invest in something that would give you residual revenue, we'd all do that in perpetuity, right? Well, so they've got a financial model. They'll help pay for some of that. So that's one way, Calvin.
Mm-hmm. I don't think a lot of folks realize that that's available.
Yep. So even an assessment, just to come in and build a business case for you. So sometimes the business case has nothing to do with dollars, and it has to do with eliminating their sleepless nights. So of keeping a platform going. So actually that's what it's been for us. I mean, the money helps. You're like, well, we've got so much invested, and to prove this out, I really need to get to an MVP status, minimally viable product or proof of concept. Can this actually work? So we'll pitch a partially partner subsidized project to go in there and assess the situation, build the business case, lay out an MVP project, and do like one proof of concept that goes, yeah, this can be done. And then they go, okay, I feel good about that. And they'll go do the whole thing. So MVP, right? Fail early. So fail often, not too often, but fail early, fail early often. Front load your risk. So I don't know. This is kind of my big slide in terms of talking to why people do this. I'll pull this slide up. I don't know that I agree with the first left one. I'll be honest, being full transparency. Comparable infrastructure, I guess I'll agree with it in that standpoint, but people don't do that. They're like, oh, I'm in the cloud. I can stand up all this. My developers can go in and I can give them access to a dev environment. All of a sudden, they're more productive. They're doing more things. Their cloud footprint just takes off. So it's really hard to make an apples to apples comparison unless you're doing something really simple like lift and shift or storage. I think the middle one's good. Just think if you could focus more energy on being productive, delivering results, building more features in your apps, taking more risks, and trying something you probably couldn't do if you didn't have the flexibility, taking advantage of services. That's kind of what that this middle thing, more efficient IT infrastructure staff is. It costs almost nothing to spin something up for a day or two, try it, and shut it down. So, and then, agility and delivering new features. That's kind of a big thing. DevOps plays big into that. We have the philosophy, everything is code. Everything. So when we spin up a new environment, we have our Terraform blueprints. We're using Control Tower, CloudFormation, whatever those tools are. And we use all the orchestration and approval processes behind the scenes. And guess what? We can do that in a multi-cloud environment too. We don't have to all pick one platform or the other. We can pick the tools we like. And that allows us to deliver new features. So good case with a customer. We had a customer with a 40 terabyte Oracle application and a Flash front end. Anybody remember Flash? I mean, it's gone now. I mean, they had to migrate.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, I know. So we moved it in the cloud so it could run out there, right? Just get it over there. And then we refactored it, completely rewrote it, Angular. I think we used Postgres and probably Dynamo in there, serverless, Lambda, API gateway, all those tools, all those services. And we rewrote that app. They went from being able to release in 6 months a new feature. They went from, if they had to fix a critical production fix, they had to take all their developers down for the duration, a few hours. Now they had 100 developers working on this product, a lot of dev teams, a lot of environments getting stood up and stood down. So it was a huge productivity increase for them. Not only, and they got them off of an end of life application platform architecture too. So that's kind of the agility. And a lot of that's DevOps, right? But it's also infrastructure as code and all that. So yeah. Here's how I describe the migration and modernization. So migration, people go, oh, great, my stuff is running in the cloud. Okay, yeah, you're in the cloud. Have you really migrated to the most modern app? And really you need to look at, do you need to? Sometimes you have those applications, you're like, in a couple of years, this thing's going to die and we don't care. So you're going to leave it alone, let it die. But for your flagship products, for the ones that drive your revenue, for the ones that maybe fix your big problems and whatnot, you're going to modernize that. So people start over here on this left-hand side. And it's not uncommon for customers to come and say, hey, I just want to run in the cloud, just easy as possible, lift and shift. That's what people think they need to do. And what we find out is that works for some things, but it doesn't for others. Because what they want to be able to do on some things is cut costs. They want to increase their ability to innovate. And so as you modernize, get things more cost native. So if you think over here on the far left, if you're running virtual machines or raw EC2 instances, those things are up and running. You haven't done a lot of optimization to it. That's a certain cost. You're buying that compute time and that size and storage capacity. Well, as you move over to the right, if you start going serverless, you're buying thinner slices of time. You're buying lighter execution workloads. You're not running the whole app. You're only running this little function. Your application actually costs, like per user, per benchmark, can go way down. So if you've got like a big SaaS application, Netflix or Salesforce or these kind of apps who, I mean, if you had like a linear type thing, it might really be expensive. Well, you cut those operational costs down and you can really make your profitability soar on those applications. So people usually start over here but then they get out there and they're like, oh, wait, okay, one, maybe it didn't save as much money as they thought. Then they need to cost optimize. And then two, they need to be more flexible and innovative. They need to move down that continuum over to the right. So
I want to challenge you a little bit on this, the lift
Sure.
and shift, the parts on the left here. I feel like that's usually an up move. Like if you just lifted and shifted, I don't know if folks are going to necessarily, they may right size somewhat, but they could have right sized on premises. They could be doing, VMware or some native hypervisor
Yep.
solution. They could start running functions as a service type things. They really could start this cloud native journey before they ever like lift. I'm going to say I think lift and shift is just a huge mistake, and folks
Yep.
shouldn't go there to start with. Period.
Yeah, people think. Yeah, my experience in the customer journey is they come to us going, we just want to lift and shift in the cloud, and you just kind of nod because once you get in and you start explaining to it, you're not just going to lift it and shift it. You're going to modify it. It's not going to be apples to apples. You're going to optimize it if you have the chance. And so that's what people end up doing.
Because they could optimize on premises if they really, really wanted to.
Yep. Yeah. We just had a customer. They had like 80% compute not utilized and a way over architected. What if you didn't have to pay for all that? So what if all this old storage was in Glacier instead of a file server? All these little things, you don't just move it over. At least we don't typically do that. So it's amazing what people are like, oh, I can do this. Yeah. It's completely, it's a completely different way, a completely new way of thinking for people. So I'm probably preaching to the choir here. So yeah, I don't know that my experience, people go, oh, I want to lift and shift. Okay. But they get in there and then they get in this second, you want to right size your hardware. Oh, you don't really need, the 16 gigs of memory there. This is a little tiny app. It just needs 4, et cetera. So yeah, so there's my Patrick meme. Take our VMs and run them over here. That's lift and shift all the way to cloud native and modernized, right? You probably don't, most people don't need to modernize everything to the nth degree, but it's really attractive for those key, like if you're a digital product company, your digital products being in that vein of cloud solutions, it's great. So we take people through these seminars. And anybody ever done an intranet migration project or some sort of application portfolio management project? So I used to do a lot of web platform SharePoint and stuff, and we'd take people's intranet and rebuild it. And inevitably, we would call 80% of their web content when we'd retire it. And I see a lot of people do that. We go in with tools, for instance, and we analyze what they have on premise, and they don't even know what they have. They think they do, but it's usually this tribal knowledge, this insider knowledge that's been handed down in a spreadsheet for 2 or 3 corporate generations. And their expectation versus reality is off. They find all these information systems talking to each other. They find all sorts of external interfaces or usage scenarios they weren't aware of. And then they find some zombies out there they just need to cut. So they end up retiring things. When they move to the cloud, to your point, Calvin, why would you keep this application? Why not just move this to this service offering over here on their new cloud platform? Why are you maintaining this old application that's no longer being updated? Relocate.
That's a liability at that
Oh,
point.
yeah.
You have a security surface area there that you have to protect.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's an old application, good luck.
Yep. Yeah, we found one company who had to open like port 22 to some. It looked super shady. It's some weird place, some weird region of the world. They had a port open so that somebody could log in and check on an application. You're like, well, that's the only way they can support it. I'm like, that's kind of a big security hole. Do you really trust them? So you have to talk through those. Replatform and relocate. Where we get in a lot, we start getting a lot. The hard stuff are these 5, 6, and 7. Rebuilding something in the cloud. No, not reusing really, but re-architecting. Completely translate something. So for instance, we went from Oracle to Postgres and RDS, DynamoDB, Lambda API gateway, and a nice Angular front end. That's a completely different architecture than Flash and Oracle. So you really kind of need to know what you're doing on those kind of scenarios because it can be really tricky. So we take, when you do this right, Calvin, you never end up with just lifting and shifting. You end up getting rid of a bunch of stuff. You end up probably having a different DR scenario. It might be different because the way you do it in the cloud is a little different than you have to do it with physical infrastructure. And then you might rebuild certain things. We find there's a lot of lift and tweak. You've got to redo this interface. You got to adjust it over here. It's not just move it over and you're done. Let's see. How we doing on time? Do I need to wrap it up here?
We've got like 10 minutes still.
All right. So I'll shut this down here in a couple minutes.
Then we can open up for questions and keep it open for discussion.
Yeah. Let's. We can kind of stop there. That's kind of the the crux of it. DevOps. Everything is code. That really gets enabled in the cloud. I don't know how many folks are doing that here in their apps, but just think if you did that with your infrastructure and your apps in a big SaaS application, the expandability that you have, it's amazing how much opportunity we get from a business standpoint just in streamlining the way people build and manage applications. So I guess I'll stop talking. and turn it back to the group here. So as I sip my St. Elmo's cola. So
Nice. So I was going to kind of bring up the discussion for folks in the room. Are people, and maybe no one has to like necessarily answer, maybe this is more rhetorical, but are people struggling with convincing whoever is the decision maker that they have to get to the cloud? Is this just a matter of budget? Is it a matter of what's keeping folks from getting to this cloud native, worldview? Sunk costs. How? I mean, maybe we need Nathan can enlighten us with like the tool set, the toolbox you need to go in with from your management, saying this is going to make this all better.
Yeah, I mean, it's really understand the pain, what their goals are, what their pains are. It's the classic sales. If we go back to Sandler's, you can't teach a kid to ride a bike at a seminar. I just taught on this subject. It's like number one thing, make sure that you understand what pain. So if you hear somebody complaining, man, I just can't, the business is asking me to do so much that I can't keep up with it. If you want to increase velocity and you can figure out what's slowing you down, DevOps, automating that infrastructure being in the cloud can help quite a bit of that. So that's a common thing I hear, is just stability too. So in terms of your operating platform, so automated test and quality, for instance.
Yeah, are there some foundational things you need to consider or get in place before you make this jump into the cloud?
So there's quite a bit. There's kind of 5 or 6 areas to look at. One, kind of to your point, Calvin, getting support at a leadership level to go there. It's that's a big part of it. Getting the training and knowing how to do what you need to do out there is part of it. Having the it's going to redo the way you manage computer systems. Another good example, have a customer who's got an infrastructure team and an application team. So the application team is running more modern applications, but the infrastructure is all on premise. Well, traditionally, those two groups have been pretty segregated and independent of one another. Well, in the cloud now, it all kind of comes together. And so the application team in this client is running at light speed, but the infrastructure team can't keep up. And so the application team's like, I want to roll out a new version of the system tomorrow. The infrastructure teams, I can't do that. But meanwhile, you have the business saying, we need that tomorrow. So overcoming that kind of agility and velocity, those kind of limitations, that can be a big way, but you have to re-architect your organization to do that. It's really almost like one team now versus 2 separate teams with different focuses. So there's a lot to consider migrating, but it's not, I firmly believe like the technology is like the easy part. It's much more the evolution it takes your company through in terms of how they leverage IT, which is hard to drive. So we have customers who they virtualized everything. They feel they've got it done. They can do it better than AWS or Azure or GCP can. They're convinced of that. You can't tell them otherwise. Can you change that? I don't know. I mean, it kind of has to, it's almost like got to hit them in the head. Like, well, can your business keep up with your competitor? I mean, can you? If a big event like COVID hit, some of our customers were in helping with some of the testing results around Indiana, and they were able to pivot, move that fast, and so they got there before their competition could. So they got their work. So those are hard things.
I feel like there's distinct advantages to the shared responsibility model that AWS brings you, and same for other clouds too. But the fact that I could today sign a BAA with Amazon and have a HIPAA compliant set of infrastructure to launch a healthcare app tomorrow. How are you going to do that on premises? Like,
yep.
There's so much headache that's just been removed there. Now that you are pushing complexity around, I feel like with DevOps, the kind of modern application delivery has shifted some of that complexity and then required there's a learning curve to that. That I think some orgs see as how do you get them to overcome that complexity shift? I think it simplifies the development of the apps, but it absolutely makes the delivery more complex.
Yeah, it's a whole new way of thinking. Sometimes in my opinion, you really have to have that leader at the top who's like, we're going to the cloud. This is the business case that we're using to make them, and they're helping get that org shift. It takes a lot longer, grassroots up. And what can happen is those folks in this labor market, I can think of a company that had all their people with cloud skills quit and took new jobs because they weren't getting the support basically from the IT leadership. Like, here's all these awesome new skills. This is the future. And you are fighting going there at all. So they left. And so all of a sudden, it's almost like there's a side of it too, that is, if you want to be competitive in the labor market, so you have good IT workers, you kind of have to stay with what people feel has a future. You know, there aren't a whole lot of people that want to build COBOL in the future. And it's not exactly the same for on-premise infrastructure, but it's still like one of those, it's kind of the hot thing. And so, you know, that's kind of to help retain and keep current with being competitive in the employment market. It's a good place to be too. So,
all right, I've monopolized all the questions so far. I want to open it up, make sure everyone else can get a question. Anybody else got questions for Nathan? I see James just unmuted, so maybe he's got a question. I'll call him out because I know him.
There you go.
I really just wanted to, I guess, mention other when I've lost the argument to move to the cloud, and see how you would respond in some of the circumstances. So one was, we were like a brand new dev shop essentially. So, you know, I'm a consultant, so I was working for a company that they had one developer in-house and they bought one server. So they bought a big enough server that they just threw everything onto it. And the CIO, I'd worked with her a bunch of times, and so she's got a good head on her shoulders. She just did some math, like, okay, here's my monthly costs. Here's how much it would be for an equivalent server in AWS. And like, her math was like, I can just rent it from Dell less expensively than I would pay to AWS. So that was one argument. I was like, well, I can't argue with that. You know, I just throw everything on the one server and be done with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think people think cost is a big driver. And I feel like most of the time I'm having more conversations about the agility, flexibility around going to the cloud. For instance, so now my development environment only exists on one box in the server room in your back closet. What if it was on the cloud and this application was redundant to US West region as well as here? Now it's never, you know, there's no way that can go away. And what if I can take advantage? I can't do IoT development really on this local box. To really experience the cloud, if we're going to do IoT use case, it's got to go through that paradigm. It doesn't sound like you're doing some IoT there, and it's hard in those micro cases too, because sometimes we've had customers who it's not about the money at all. It's so weird, you know.
We had this similar thing where it's mostly about their IP, their intellectual property, that they just can't get over that culture shift of putting their bits in someone else's server. Like, it has to be on their hardware in their network.
Yeah,
and so that's another time we've lost that battle of why can't we just put this into an AWS container? And there have been times we put it there, and they had to shift it back for that reason.
Yeah, we had a customer who was a law enforcement agency. And they had that same kind of prejudice towards, I want to physically secure my own device. And the case it's kind of one of those things that takes time. Like, there's no way you're going to provide as secure a physical data center as like what AWS or Azure or GCP, any of these platforms provide. you don't have the budget for that. You're a little tiny police agency. So if you build this properly out here, it's far more secure and you don't have to worry about it. But sometimes you do, you get stuck, James, with those situations where people are like, this is what we've always done. And from a sales standpoint, it's just like, well, I mean, you kind of go on to the next customer that says, I can see that.
That's what I did. That's what I did. I just moved on.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, well, I mean, there's the whole, I'm not Mr. Sales Guru, but it's like, well, the customer doesn't, I can't convince them they want. We use it. So I'll put my sales hat. I know most of us are engineers hat, but most of the time when we sell, we want the customer to actually come to us with the idea. So we plant the seed, and I can think of a couple customers in particular where we're not going to probably be doing business with them for a year or two, but we're going to plant that seed. And in a year or two, they'll come back. I'm tired of managing this data center. Can you do that for me? Yes, we can. No, we don't manage it, but yeah, we can get you out of that. We can eliminate that headache. And sometimes it seems in the Midwest here, it's like we're a little slower than other areas of the country. And, to accommodate some of that. So security is one big thing, James, too. I like to tell the story about the person I know who was in charge of driving to another city to put up backup tapes from their healthcare facility. Steve's probably squirming as he hears me tell this, but they had PHI on a disc, and they would take it back in their car. So we talk about encryption at rest and then encryption in transit. Probably neither one of those things were taking place. Well, they stopped somewhere and someone broke in their car and stole that laptop that had all that data on it. There it went. Millions of records, PHI, all this stuff. Why were they doing that? It's use cases like that too, that you can get rid of those headaches. So, yeah.
Yeah, I like that, Steve. The no PHI in your trunk policy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it brings up a good point. I mean, to like kind of what James and Nathan were just talking about with the customer with like the single giant server. I'm going to just deploy there. I'm going to have my dev environment there. I'm going to have my staging environment there. I feel like from a developer experience standpoint, I have a lot more advantages to using the cloud to help offload or to modernize my development environment or to make sure it's sane, like that I'm following practices that give me repeatable deployments.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's one of the reasons I like the shift in complexity for DevOps, is that as a developer, if I'm helping somebody debug a problem, I can reproduce it on my own machine. Or if I'm using Kubernetes, I can just rename the namespace for that deployment, and bang, I've got like exactly what they're seeing in my own namespace running on the same cluster potentially, and I'm debugging away without having to go through all these kind of getting started steps, make a fresh directory and try and like set my environment up the exact same way someone else had it. So I feel like the cloud gives us a lot of benefit from a developer experience. And also, who's going to have a laptop with 64 gigabytes plus of memory to be able to run maybe the number of containers needed to be able to develop on a specific application or a specific scenario? Or if I'm doing big data, DevOps data pipelines, I need more resources, but I need to be able to have my tools available to me. So I've been looking at tools recently like Cloud9, Codespaces. I think that JetBrains is getting ready to do a release of Fleet, which is going to be something similar. I spin up EC2 instances or VMs in some cloud, but my local editor is the same tool I'm familiar with and comfortable with, but I'm using those resources that are in that cloud to get my work done. So I'm not waiting. I'm not, it's kind of the old story of like the XKCD, the two guys like sword fighting in the hallway with the, swords, and they're like, what are you guys doing? And they're like, we're waiting for, make to build or whatever, or GCC to compile. That doesn't happen anymore. If you've got an unlimited, infinite amount of resources available to you that you only pay for when you use them.
Yep. Yeah, that's a really good point, Calvin. Thanks for bringing that back. But with the same amount of money, you could have a dev test prod environment. in
Oh, yeah.
separate dev environments. So
Isolated.
yeah, I need to work on something big data. Boom, one account structure. Boom, I need to work on my own apps. I've got it over here. And you can spin them up, spin them down. If your development team expands, blow that blueprint out. Somebody else is already up and running within minutes, hours, they can be developing away. Versus if you spin up another developer on the project, all of a sudden I've got to go get a physical box, plug it in the wall. You're handcuffed with what you can do with one box. I mean, I don't know how many times. So I did independent consulting for a long time. If I showed you my shelf over here, I have stacks of laptops. I'd buy a $400 laptop for every client.
Mine over here.
Yeah. I'd buy a laptop for every client because I needed a different development environment for every customer in every scenario. And it was just too gnarly to try to reuse it. And it wasn't worth $400. It was, it's the same kind of thing with a lot of concurrent developers. I mean, try to imagine like the scenario I described earlier, to transcribe that SaaS platform was 100 developers all across the world, working simultaneously, but they all needed their own development environments. We all needed to weave those pipelines into builds so that we could get builds out within an hour or so. There's no way you're going to do that with like physical boxes or, we need a new development team to build this feature. It's going to be a month before we can get that all set up for you. No, that's not a good answer anymore. It's okay. Well, they could start working on it tomorrow. We'll have it in the next sprint. So,
Yeah, that's awesome. Any more questions for Nathan? This has been great.
All right. Well, thanks for hearing me talk. So.
All right, Daniel, bring it.
I have a question if you have another moment.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I've got a really challenging use case to where I am selling so I do smart locks. And if I want a third party to interface with my smart lock, they typically do it with their on-premise server.
Yep.
Now I'm telling them that I need you to integrate with the cloud to talk to my lock.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is the entire value chain, the salespeople, the integrators, everybody who makes money when they sell my lock does it because of a capital request at the beginning of a project where they get $4 million and they do the project. And now I'm telling them, don't do $4 million up front, do 3.75, and you have to trickle the rest of me over the next 10 years. They don't know how to pay me. And even when you get to all the different payment services, like I don't just have to convince that end person, I got to convince the entire value chain, which then makes me say, shoot, well, I'm just going to make something that looks like the cloud and wait for the rest of the market to catch up. Any advice for these on-prem legacy value chains for products?
Wow. Yeah. So that's a good one. I mean,
just get the old hardware to start talking to the new stuff through an API.
So it is a completely different purchasing model.
Yeah.
In terms of even selling consulting services, which is what we do. We still have people that say, I want to pay for the project fixed bid all up front, or they'll ask for that. And that's just such a hard thing to do with the cloud because or at least with the agility in the cloud. So it's almost like what we sell is the capacity model. We're going to build this feature and here's what we're going to tell you a really accurate cost of what it is. And here's what you're going to get. Like if you buy something and it's a physical device, you get that and it burns down for the next 3 years, or however long you have it. When you go to the cloud, you're getting continual updates. So you're not just paying for the $4 million up front with one static thing that's going to burn down in terms of your capital expense. Now you're basically, it's almost like a subscription. You're buying the service of these security features. And here's what's on our product roadmap short term, and we bill for this in this way, and you get this. But you're going to get more features if you buy this product by going into this purchasing model in the next release than if you just bought your legacy product. So that's one way it kind of transforms the way people think about what they're buying. They're not just buying an asset that never changes. They're subscribing to something that's constantly innovating. And so it's a mind shift, but that's how I kind of think about it. So I kind of sell that value is how I would put that. Does that help, Daniel? I don't know.
Well, so it sounds like a bit of the story has to be telling them how less secure their existing environment is. That's really rough when your product's security focused. So then I have to say, okay, well, instead, here are all the updates you didn't apply over the last 5 years because you thought it was too hard and you didn't have the admins.
Yep.
So
if I go back to one of these slides and I talk about increased security, patching, right? Just think about if you moved all your databases over and your operating systems and you never had to worry about patching them, right? If you just lift and shift, you still got to go patch those EC2 instances. But if you go into a managed cloud native platform like DynamoDB, where they're just updating it all the time, you never worry about it again. The shared responsibility, if you have some of those tasks on your plate today that would fall under a cloud vendor's purview in the future, that's a great case to say they're going to be way more up to date on patching and vulnerability detection than we are. I mean, I find it really hard to think that almost any corporate data center can think about security in the way that like AWS does, or really any of the big cloud providers. They just, they have far more advanced and thousands of people dedicated to that than what, typical people do in corporate environments. I mean, you might have a handful of people focused solely on security. In these big cloud environments, you have people at all levels focused on it. So that is a big shift, though, because
and that gets to the shift left part of security there. If you kind of talked about hitting like Dynamo or like cloud managed versions of those services, your code still has to run someplace. If you can containerize that part of the application, you can now have a CI/CD pipeline that runs, every Sunday night. It runs the safety check against all your dependencies, and so there's a CVE against some library you're using. Rebuild the container, redeploy the container. Name one data center on premises that is doing that.
And one more follow-up question there. You said that these different cloud providers will help deal with the offset of migration to the cloud. Is there any way I can pass that service on to those end customers that if they're buying my IoT devices, I now have to spin up more services in the cloud for them? Therefore, is there some third party willing to pay to help this out?
So I don't know all the IoT spend programs like that. What I do know is, at least with AWS, if you were to migrate an IoT platform, the services to get it there could be partially subsidized by AWS, and those get passed on to the customer. So it gets really complicated. AWS is huge. They have a bunch of programs, but this is where I put my partner hat on all the time. I'm like, you really ought to work with a partner so that they can help you navigate that. Because I had a customer who they migrated a bunch of Oracle database applications into AWS. And then they found out after that they could have gotten all these credits for doing that because it's competitive play. And they went cloud native, so they reduced, they did a bunch of things that AWS would have subsidized. But because they did it first and then asked for the money, they didn't get the money. If they had asked for the money, been approved, and then done it, then it would have been cool and they would have been okay. But they just didn't know. So yeah, I would reach out to your AWS account manager and ask them that, honestly. So
great, thank you.
Yep. there, all cloud vendors have these kind of programs. They all do it differently. I will say AWS's program, I think, is really compelling for people. So I've seen AWS take customers that were certainly going to one cloud platform and completely change their mind just based on how they partner with people. So
Yeah, I think that a lot of this gets also back to there is a mindset around selling a physical thing into your on-premises data center. Like, I'm going to sell you, if I'm CDW, or if I'm some, SHI, I've got hardware to sell. I'm going to sell the hardware, and that's what some of the salespeople only know how to do. You're going to have to train those salespeople to think outside that box, 100%.
yeah, it's easy for me. I'm a consulting, so it's a little different. We sell
Right.
to
Yeah, same.
yeah, it's like we don't sell boxes and things. We sell the service that the box provides, and it's you sell security versus a lock. It's a different thing. So
Awesome.
yeah, thanks for
Any
having
more
me.
questions? Yeah.
Yeah,
Any more questions for Nathan? This has been great. And again, I really appreciate you coming in and speaking at Indie AWS. If folks do have questions for you, where can they find you online?
I'm like the one and only Nathan Hiscock in like the whole world. So if you look me up on LinkedIn, you're going to find my profile. That's the best way, honestly. So yeah, look me up on LinkedIn. I'm a big social media guy, so I use primarily LinkedIn these days.
I will
So
look you up.
yep, yeah.
Cool.